To be called to order.
Yes, sir.
We are.
I call the Finance Committee to order for the 20th of April meeting. All members are present and accounted for. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? We promised ourselves, you promised me that we would start right away with the presentation, so we'll move right to that after approval of the minutes. All those in favor of the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. There are minutes. I have read them. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from Friday?
Move to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, I think we're ready to move to presentation from the Office of Emergency Management. Everybody on mute.
Does that include me as well?
I don't think so.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having the Office of Emergency Management present on our FY21 operating budget. If you could turn to the next slide, please. So can you all see the slides?
Not yet. No. Now we can.
So go ahead and go to slide number 2, please. So I thought we'd start this off by just going over OEM's current objective. And along the way, if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them. Dave or I will answer the questions, be happy to. One is to maintain the capacity to respond and coordinate quickly and effectively to any situation with or without notice. 2 is to support city offices and departments in their efforts to increase their emergency support function capabilities. Every department has their daily tasks and their daily mission. Emergency support functions is what the departments has when the city is in peril from some type of emergency disaster or crisis. An example of this would be rec and parks. They do rec and park stuff every day. However, their emergency support function is sheltering. That's an example. 3, to lessen the impact of future disasters, protecting our citizen residents, visitors, and assets against the greatest threats and hazards in a manner that allows our interests, our aspirations, and our way of life to thrive. 4, continue opioid intervention team and related programs, monitoring the effectiveness of our substance use disorder program. So these objectives change. However, this is the current objectives and all. And we're going to talk about COVID-19 a little bit and how that has an impact on everything. So if you could.
Kevin, can I stop you? I'm looking at the performance measures that we got a couple of weeks ago from management, and I'm not quite matching up with what you're showing now. Are these new performance measures?
These are daily objectives. I will get into the performance measures later in the programs, and also we'll get into our long-term goals.
Okay. Thank you.
So when the mayor and the council voted to put OEM's core mission areas at the highest level of government by making OEM a standalone agency in the last budget, we adopted the phrase, Annapolis OEM, the opportunities are endless, and it truly is. OEM has 7 main program areas that we actively execute on a daily basis, and they are planning, special events, community outreach and public information, substance use disorder response, training and exercise, and grant management. So I'll start with planning in the top left. Planning is an important emergency management tool comprised of preparedness, prevention, response, recovery, and mitigation. OEM develops and manages scores of plans designed to save lives and minimize risk. I don't have to tell you that much about special events. We're a special events town. OEM coordinates City of Annapolis resources to ensure the safety of our community and visitors and minimize the impacts of any emergency at a planned special event. Substance use disorder, where it says OD-free Annapolis, that's one of our programs. In 2017, Governor Hogan declared a state of emergency on the opioid problem in Maryland. The state of emergency indicated that the 26 emergency managers, which I'm one of, joined the local health officers in leadership roles to combat substance use disorder in Maryland. Last year, 2019, we saw an 18% decrease in documented overdoses in the city of Annapolis. However, our overdose fatalities, when people actually died from overdoses, rose from 11 in 2018 to 13 in 2019. OEM was able to secure $75,000 in grants for police, for fire, for the mayor's office, and OEM to develop Annapolis-centric programs to decrease substance use disorder problem in Annapolis. Training and exercise. If you've been around Annapolis any length of time, you know how we take our training and exercise programs. We're pretty aggressive with it. OEM develops, coordinates, and implements exercises involving City of Annapolis departments to also include state and local partners to help them practice response skills in real-life disaster scenarios. The citywide preparedness exercise is a full-scale exercise held once a year in Annapolis for the past 10 years. This exercise tests all of our plans in response to hurricanes, tornadoes, active shooters, pandemics, snowstorms, and other disasters. Community outreach on the top right. OEM places a high priority on community outreach and public information. Accelerating changes in demographic trends in Annapolis, along with changing technology, require OEM to be innovative in preparedness, response, and recovery, emergency, disaster, or crisis. Our programs are tailored to meet the needs of the elderly, special interest groups, businesses, nonprofits, Annapolis employees, houses of worship, municipal partners, disadvantaged populations, and others, to include animal safety. Response. In this area, OEM coordinates actions to save lives and prevent further damage in an emergency, disaster, or crisis. Some actions include directing department heads and their resources, requesting and coordinating county, state, and federal resources, and implementing emergency operations plans. And last but not least, grant management, and I'll talk about grant management a little later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, OEM has what I call our bread and butter responses that remain constant throughout various times of the year. You could see, starting with winter, you know, we're busy with winter storms, the warming center at the Stanton Center, and special events. In the spring, we're inundated with nuisance flooding, the annual boat show, the spring boat show, and special events. In the summertime, it's hurricanes, severe storms, extreme heat, and special events. In the fall, it's the annual boat show. We get some civil protesting and special events. Common denominator in the city of Annapolis, being a tourist town, is special events. Next slide. Next slide, please. There is no question that COVID-19 has been our greatest challenge in my tenure as emergency manager. City of Annapolis has been working with Anne Arundel County Health Department which is the lead agency, and Dr. Kalyana Raman is the incident commander. I'm the incident commander in Annapolis. He's the overall incident commander. They're the lead agency, and we've been working with the county, the state, and the federal government to execute a whole of America response to COVID-19 pandemic. So OEM engages all the time with the public to disseminate information on the basic stuff, which is wash your hands frequently, avoid touching your face, eyes, nose, and mouth, maintain social distancing at 6 feet, wear face covering, and limit non-essential travel and stay home. But in addition to that, we've done some advanced things with COVID-19. We've developed 10 incident objectives that serve as a guiding principle for our responses. And we meet with the department heads every day at 2 o'clock, and we go over and strategize with our plans to combat COVID-19. We've ensured that each city department has an adequate amount of personal protective equipment. We started today a walk-in COVID-19 testing site. It's in Parole today, and it will move to different areas in the city. So we'll get out a schedule soon to let you know when testing is coming to your area. We've done food assistant outreach. COVID-19 has had a great effect on folks and their ability to go out and get food and to have money to pay for food. So we've done great food assistance outreach. We partner with Annapolis area assisted livings and senior living facilities to prevent the spread of the virus within their facilities and assist with their personal protective equipment. We know one of our biggest challenges is if COVID-19 infiltrates an assisted living or senior living place. We saw what happened in Mount Airy. We're seeing what's happening in Baltimore. And if it gets into those facilities, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to affect our firefighters and police officers, first responders, let alone the elderly in that facility. So we work hard with them to make sure we have every measure in place to keep COVID-19 out of those facilities. Is it going to get in those facilities? Probably, but we're going to have every measure in place to minimize the impact. So we've opened the Annapolis call center on a 24/7 basis. We're supporting small businesses and develop a small business task force. We've implemented a joint information center to ensure the dissemination and complete and accurate information that goes out to the public. And we've implemented a process to capture the city's costs on COVID-19 for FEMA reimbursements. Next slide, please.
Kevin,
Yes.
were those masks in the last slide made by Sheila?
So the Merry Mask Makers, so when we first started out, we had little direction on the mask. So we were giving them hospital grade masks, which we need to reserve for the first responders, fire and police. So once CDC said, hey, look, you can use face coverings, we implemented the Merry Mask Makers, in which Sheila is one of the Merry Mask Makers. And they have actually designed masks for all of our employees. And we think we have everybody, we have it so every employee has a mask, or a face covering, I should say. And now we're going back, getting them a second one. So when they're washing the first one, they'll have the second one. And you on the council, you should have received your mask as well. Is that not right?
I didn't get one. Where do you get
one? You need one?
Actually, I have a garage full of N95 masks that I've been using.
Okay, so Rhonda Bendel Charles is your representative, and I'll make sure that you'll find out who needs the mask, and we'll make sure everyone has one.
Thank you.
Kevin, I have some masks here that I haven't distributed yet. So to whom should I get these masks?
Caitlin Tish in the Office of Emergency Management.
Caitlin? Okay.
So here's one of Alderman Arnett's favorite things to talk about is grants. There are 26 recognized offices of emergency management in the state of Maryland. That includes the 24 counties, Baltimore City, Ocean City, and the city of Annapolis. There's a lot of competition for grant funding here. Although Annapolis is the smallest of the recognized jurisdictions, Annapolis receives one of the higher portions of Homeland Security grant funding. This is because of OEM's philosophy of aggressively pursuing any grant opportunities, and we've been pretty successful at securing these grants. On average, OEM secures about $1 million in grant funding per year, and that's, you can see it a little bit in the red at the lower right. And then during my tenure, which will be 10 years in July, we received $10.1 million worth of grants. So we received, over in the left corner, you can see the various grants that we're successful with: the Urban Area Security Initiative, State Homeland Security grants, and the Emergency Management Performance grants. They're our main state grants, but we also get other grants and we pursue other grants. So we've done pretty good with the grant department. Next slide. So as I talk about where the grant funding tends to go, think about the cost to the city if these grants were not available. So law enforcement, officer equipment, critical infrastructure upgrades, training, the mobile command vehicle, CCTV, and the fencing around the department, that was paid for by grants. Fires, equipment, and training, hazmat, bomb squad. I cannot see that. Let me, hold on for 1 second. Okay. Camera security system for the stations and generators. And emergency management is planner salaries, emergency notification system, the emergency operations center equipment and training. And public works is multiple variable message signs, mobile street signs, and generators. Planning and zoning, we supported the Weather It Together program with funding, the cultural resource hazards mitigation plan, I think the first of its kind. We supported that with grant funding, and we've brought code books for planning and zoning with grants. In the mayor's office, we supported a substance abuse outreach program and some training. MIT, aerial flyover for mapping purposes, computers, servers, and a security mentor program. In human resources, we've supported the employee badging equipment. We bought that with grants. Rec and Parks, radio interoperability, shelter improvements, because they're responsible for sheltering and training. Harbor Master, radio interoperability and training, transportation, radio operability, equipment for buses, which we did recently, and training. City Council, you guys can think back over the years, we paid for training. You guys are on a schedule to be trained on various things once every 2 years, and you're due this year. So we've had Katrina training, ICS, civil unrest mitigation, opioid. Next slide, please.
Yeah, but we're not trainable, you know that.
You know, but I try, what can you say? So I'm gonna turn it over, this slide over to Dave Mandel. One of the things, and I gotta give Dave credit, we're a good team because I'm an operational guy. I deal with emergencies, disasters, and all, and that's what I do, that's what I'm pretty good at. And Dave is a mitigation guy. So Dave can minimize the risk before things happen. And together, you put us together, we're a pretty good team. And I remember Dave bringing us to our attention to pursue this $3 million FEMA grant. And we've been on this thing since 2017, and we're getting close. I know every time I see you guys, I say we're getting close, but really this time we're getting close. So I'm gonna let Dave talk a little bit about that.
Dave, before you start, let me just do a time hack. The Finance Committee, and I'm probably the biggest part of that, hasn't been good at minding the time, and as a result, we're running over and bumping other departments back. So We're shooting for 45 minutes. We obviously plan to run over a little bit, but please remember also to leave us some time to talk specifically about your budget, the actual numbers. Thank you.
Sure thing. Sure thing. Thank you, Alderman. And I will be brief. It is true, and thank you, Chief, that we have been pursuing this grant since 2017. And before that, we actually pursued the same project under another grant and was denied. So the particular project, it's been a 5-year odyssey, literally. It's also true that we are very close. As you may know, one of basically the last step in getting this grant is to satisfy the historical preservation folks. There's the required archaeological environmental studies before it can be cleared. FEMA's already accepted our budget, which is usually the biggest hurdle. They've already accepted our cost benefit analysis and so forth. The last step is this archaeological survey. We did the first survey. They said, okay, now time to do a second survey. So we did a second survey. Public Works coordinated that obviously with AECOM. And that final report was sent last week to FEMA and the Maryland Historical Trust. FEMA has told us that, with some emails around that time, that basically they expect within 60 to 90 days of that date that they can approve the project, give or take, obviously. So we do think we're very close. This is pretty much the last step. Once the Maryland Historical Trust signs off and says, yes, we accept these practices and the findings and the reports, that should be the end of it, and then FEMA would issue a letter approving the grant. So that's sort of the understanding at this point. So we are very close, and stay tuned, and we'll see what we can find. But we've been diligently working on pursuing this grant kind of behind the scenes for the last 3 years. So that'll be a big boon to our downtown flood mitigation efforts. Next slide, please.
Thank you, David. As Alderwoman Finlayson can attest, I've been worrying about this grant. So it sounds like we're almost there, and I appreciate that.
Yes, it's anytime you get, thank you, Alderman Arnett, for your leadership on this point. Anytime you get a multi-million-dollar source of funding that relates to local and state and federal authorities and all the patchwork of rules and environmental restrictions in a historic area like we are, it's going to take a lot of time, but we're pretty close. Chief, would you like me to continue with Peg?
Let me set it up. And Alderman Arnett, we will be done in 45 minutes. I guarantee it. It's been 10 years since the EOC, as you know, it has been constructed, and it's very operational, but we have some very outdated equipment. When OEM was in charge of managing the governor's first inauguration, Governor Hogan's first inauguration, our center lacked interoperability to communicate with agencies such as the Maryland State Police, State Highway Administration, and National Guard. So we found that out when we were in charge of his first inauguration. So it was important to them that the Emergency Operations Center and the state's capital have proper interoperability. So they donated $30,000 to complete that upgrade of our center.
I remember.
Yes. So we feel that we have the ability to complete major upgrades at no cost to the city coffers. And this is another project that Dave has been active in, and I'll let Dave explain how we can do that.
Thank you, Chief. So we have a real opportunity here, folks. There's the PEG source of funding that you're probably familiar with. It's public educational and governmental funds that come from folks paying their cable bill who live in Annapolis. It's the $1 or so that comes off every month required for governmental use. We are proposing a project to use some of these funds to turn the EOC into a PEG facility that would allow us to broadcast, record, preserve all kinds of city meetings, operational briefings, trainings, workshops, and potentially broadcast them. So we think it's a big public benefit. It would be a tremendous training benefit as well. And it'd be used in PEG funds. Part of this project is to bring up to date some of that equipment that Chief mentioned. I know, you know, a lot of people may look at the EOC and say, look at all this great stuff, and we do have some great stuff. Not all of it is great. Some of it is original from 2010 when the building was first set up. No digital signal, microphones that don't work very well, you know, and so on and so forth. So this is designed to shore up some of those original equipment that's well past the end of its useful life, and to give us the added capacity to broadcast essential meetings and workshops and so forth. We're working on getting a final price from the vendor. This is the same vendor that the City of Annapolis TV uses for their broadcast projects. But give or take, the last price we got was about $287,000. City TV is in support of the project, and the Office of Law has stated that that this project is a permissible use of funds under this regime. By the way, the funds, the PEG funds do have very limited scope in what you are allowed to use them on, equipment only for PEG facilities, and this qualifies. So we think, given the benefits, that it would be an excellent, worthwhile use of these PEG funds. Any questions on that point?
Next slide, please.
Well, Dave, presumably if that grant turns out to be insufficient to cover all the expenses, then the city would cover the rest?
No, we have grant funding to cover the rest. Did you hear me, Alderman?
Yeah. Well, so that the 287,000 plus or minus could change. I mean, it could be a little higher, could be a little less. Is that?
Sure. We have grant funding that we think that we would be able to use to offset anything that wasn't paid for by PEG.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Alderman Arnett, OEM benchmarks and corresponding performance measures, there are 6. Benchmark, 10 programs facilitated citywide. Performance measure would be the number of facilitated training, exercise, and outreach programs citywide. Examples would be active attendance, seasonal outreach programs, involvement in events and festivals, and Web EOC, which is a records management system training. 2, the benchmark is 5 programs supported by grant funds. Performance measures would be the number of preparedness and response related programs supported by secured grant fundings. Examples would be bomb squad, hazmat team, law enforcement equipment and training, mobile command, evacuation, and transportation equipment. So third benchmark, 3 plans completed. The performance measure would be the number of plans completed on the breadth and range and complexity of the program. Some plans are simple, some plans are very, very complex, and it takes a year or so to complete. Examples would be the emergency operations plan. So that's one of the ones that'll be under this year's benchmark. The continuity of government plan. The hazardous mitigation plan is already complete, and the continuity of operations plan, which we went over with the different departments in anticipation of COVID-19.
Kevin,
yes.
Excuse me, but the page wasn't changed. We're still on page 10. You're on page 11, I think.
Change the page, please. Thank you.
But Kevin, also, I appreciate what you're doing, but I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly. You have for OEM 4 goals, accompanied by 4 objectives. 1, 2, 3, 4. By 4 objectives, and it seems like I'm having a hard time directly matching the 6 benchmarks you're giving us to the 4 goals. Now I know this is a new system, very formative, and we're finding our way as we go. But at some point, I guess it would be helpful if we could connect across the line from goals, objectives, benchmarks, and performance measures, and see how they match up, or at least help me understand. Maybe they match up perfectly well and I'm just not comprehending it.
Yes, sir. So I think where I'm confusing you is I started out with just objectives. Maybe I should have left the objectives out because I'm going to talk about the goals after we talk about the benchmarks and performance measures. So,
right,
what you heard in the beginning of the presentation, forget about that.
Right. All right.
Forget about that.
I'm going to stop interrupting you. Sorry.
Forget about that. I think when I talk about the goals, it should wrap everything up. So let's start at 3. Benchmark 3. 3 plans completed. I talked about that. And 4 is 5 mitigation actions. And the performance measure for that is a number of mitigation action examples would be flood mitigation, outreach to the public, flood mitigation working group activities. Last year, we started a flood mitigation group to talk about things all flood mitigation in Annapolis. And it meets quarterly. And we've had some good suggestions come out of that group. So we're holding them in our benchmarking and performance measures. So we're hoping that some of the ideas that come out of that group we can bring to fruition, and that will be a part of our performance measures. Change the slide, please. So benchmark 5, less than 25 overdoses per month, and 2 substance use disorder programs initiated. Now this is a tough one. So performance measures are number of fatal and non-fatal overdoses, number of substance use disorder prevention, enforcement, and treatment programs initiated. Examples would be the existing OD-free Annapolis, which comes from OEM, Your Life Matters, which is a fire department program, Naptown Anti-Dope program, which is from the mayor's office, and the Annapolis Police Department's substance use disorder program. So our goal is to bring down the overdoses and to bring down the fatal overdoses, and that's a tall order given these circumstances, because if you think with COVID, you have a stay-at-home order. If you consume alcohol, then you're going to consume more alcohol. If you use drugs, you're going to use more drugs with the stay-at-home order. So that's going to be a big challenge for us. 6 benchmark is 3 terrorism-related training and prevention measures initiated. Performance measure is the number of terrorism-related training and prevention measures initiated, and we think we can meet this one fairly easy. Next slide, please. So now that you have the benchmarks, now you have the goals based on the benchmarks. So our goal is to build a robust level of preparedness to ensure city's ability to adapt to changing conditions and to withstand disruptions in the aftermath of a catastrophic event. 2, we talked about mitigation in our benchmarks. To mitigate the loss of life and property by floods, hurricanes, and snowstorms, what we want to do in our benchmarks and our performance measures is lower the risk. 3, to support the reduction in impacts of substance use disorder. We talked about that in our benchmarks, in our performance measures. We want to get those numbers down. And we also talked about terrorism in our benchmarks and performance measures. And we want to provide a system of prevention measures that make a terrorist attack difficult. And we want to do that through our urban area security initiative funding, our training, our equipment, and our mitigation. Next slide, please. So my overwhelming budget here. So one of the things, we have to tighten the belt, our budget belts, and OEM is certainly on board with that. Anything to help the city navigate through these things. We're we're all on board for. So the proposed budget reductions, OEM's contributions to the challenging budget environment caused by COVID-19. So OEM's non-salary operating budget in FY 2020 was $28,766.80. A 10% reduction amounts to $2,876. So what we propose is eliminating the $1,800 that we have in training and education. That'll be eliminated. And the rest of it will come from reducing our supply budget by $1,077.
So let me unfortunately interrupt. I'm looking at the summary sheet of proposed reductions that we got from Jody for OEM, and I'm having a hard time connecting up. Oh, I see. The 2,876 was rounded up to $2,900 in this schedule. So that makes sense. I'm back on track. Thank you.
So
I have a question, Kevin. What is your total training and education budget if you're eliminating 1,800 from that?
our total budget provided by the city was 1,800.
So you're eliminating the entire training and education budget?
My thoughts here is that I can get some grant money in training and education and subsidize it with that. So I can do grant training and education through grants.
And will the elimination of the training and education budget impact our ability to secure additional grants?
It will not. It will not. The only problem I see here is I have more flexibility with the $1,800 when it comes out of the city coffers, and grants have certain guidelines. So if I have to do let's say I have to do an active shooter training and I want to have people mobilize like they've been shot, as an example. The grant budget may not cover that. I may have to ask permission, and typically if I ask permission, they'll cover it. But if I'm using the training and education from the city coffers, I don't have to ask that question. I can just go ahead and do it. So we feel that this is the best way to go to do our share because of the challenge of the budget and all, and then we'll make it up with grant funding.
If I can just interject, I'll get to you in a second, Fred, to the committee, but I'm looking at the schedule that Katie sent us Friday, and Sheila, the question you answered is on that schedule, the very last line. These numbers are somewhat rounded. It says 1,900 for training on that schedule, but that's why having this more detail is very helpful as we walk through the departments. Thank you. Fred? Fred, did you want to say something?
Got to unmute myself. Director, the staffing salaries, are any of those covered by grants? I'm looking at 7 last year, 8 this year.
I will get to that once. I'll handle that next, Alderman. Is that okay? I do have that in my presentation.
Okay.
If you have no questions, we can go to the next page.
Well, I do have some questions, but I'll wait till the end.
I'd like to add a little to that reduction. The amount that we took for OEM was $2,900 total, $1,800 for training, and $1,100 for the supplies. We rounded up to 1,077. Somebody said, some list said that we had taken 1,900. I don't know where that is, but if something we sent said that, it was wrong.
The 19, let's let Kevin finish because we can get back into that detail.
Projection number for 20.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, proposed cost neutral enhancement, and the enhancement that we want is to have our contractual employees converted to civil service. And that'll be cost neutral because the grants, our Urban Area Security Initiative grants, along with our State Homeland Security grant, will pay the salaries of them, of the two people that I want to convert at no cost to the city. It'll pay for the pension, it'll pay for their medical, it'll pay their salaries, it'll pay for everything. So over the years, OEM has lost some top talent due to a lack of opportunity for them to join the city in the civil service capacity. Because these positions were reduced to being contractual, our business model in OEM was to hire talented young people that were trying to break into the emergency management business, and they were more willing to accept these positions. But OEM provides many professional experiences and opportunities to improve your emergency management skill set very, very quickly. When you come here, you get thrown into the fray, you learn a lot of stuff very fast, which makes you very valuable. As our personnel start to grow in their personal lives, they think more about things like pensions for the future, job security, building a family. We've lost some good talent based on the limited opportunity to be fully invested in the Annapolis family. Money is important, but they want security of being civil service with the city. Converting these positions to civil service will allow the city to benefit from the productivity that comes from the training of these young professionals locally without having to renew contracts annually or risk losing valued employees to more permanent opportunities. And I'll give you a couple examples of folks that we lost in these conditions. Lauren Miller, everybody remembers Lauren Miller. She left to work for the National Capital Region. She's noted because she actually developed and implemented the Prepare Me Annapolis app. We all remember Patrick Donlin. He left to work for MEMA. He started the drone program, the mitigation programs, Weather It Together program. He was a main player in that, and he's the main author of our emergency operations plan. We had a person here that was very, very talented, stayed here a short time. Her name was Megan Williams, and she left to work on Capitol Hill. And she was noted for leading the traffic study group that we had, and it went defunct after she left. And she took on some BGE projects. So what we're trying to do here is that we have some employees, they're pretty valuable to our operations. They're very, very talented. One of these employees actually live in Annapolis. She lives here, she works here, she walks to work here. That's the type of person that we want, a talented person living in Annapolis, walks to work. She's invested in this community. So both of them are pretty talented. We want to keep them. And I think it's time that we do this. We do, I do. Next slide, please. So here's what we look like. This is the current organizational chart. So the exempt positions are in red. You see the city manager and myself. We have 2 civil service positions. That's the deputy director and the emergency grant specialist. That's Nicole Queen. Last year I asked for, and the council granted a civil service position for my senior emergency planner, which is also grant funded at no cost to the city. And in the green, we have 2 positions, the emergency management planner and the exercise training and outreach coordinator. They are grant funded. So here's what I'm trying to get to. Next slide. The proposed organizational chart. Again, city manager, myself exempt, civil service in white, deputy director, and the emergency management grant specialist, and then the civil service, but grant funded positions would be the senior emergency planner, the emergency management planner, the exercise training and outreach coordinator. So before Alderman Arnett asked this question, I will answer it. What happens when the money runs out? So I've been funding this org chart since 2010, and the funding has been pretty current. The grant funding has been pretty current. Now, we were told in the UASC region, which includes the city of Annapolis, that we received funding at the same level as last year. So provided no other money comes in, which would not happen in my estimation, that these positions would be paid for to calendar year 2023. So we have enough funding to take us right now. We didn't get anything else to 2023. But as in the past 10 years, the UASC funding and the state homeland security funding has been coming in regularly. And I have no reason to believe that it's going to stop. So I'm hoping that you will support turning these contractual positions into civil service positions.
So let me speak to the committee for a second, but I believe that the director has followed the requests that we've said, no additions unless you're coming with cuts. In this case, he's arguing it's no addition. I would suggest to the committee that we ask Takia to put this on the parking lot and to remind us when we go into our deliberations. I think we'll have to have a discussion, obviously, with the city manager, the finance director, and the HR director, but I personally feel we can honor the request from the director by being reminded to discuss it when we go into our deliberations, but I'm putting that out for your sense, Sheila and Fred.
Can I ask David Gerald if this was included in the mayor's proposed budget?
It was not.
Neutral?
It was not. There's a lot of issues surrounding the contract employees that I think we should get into in a separate discussion. But it was not, to answer your immediate question.
Okay. Then I look forward to that discussion. I hope we don't lump these positions in with other contract employee positions that we have tried to eliminate that are not cost neutral. So, but yeah, I agree. We need to put it on our to-do list to address it.
All right. Let me ask at this point, how many more slides? We do need to leave some time for
One slide.
One more slide. Thank you.
Next slide. Thank you. For all the support, I've gotten a lot of support from the council over the years. And you really supported us last year, and I really appreciate that. I think that you created a bigger and better and greater Office of Emergency Management. And I think with what we're asking for this year, you'll even enhance that. That'll put us where we need to be. So if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If not, thanks for having us today.
Thank you for your presentation. I think that the departments and you are certainly included there have done a wonderful job of being responsive to the committee, but I think at the same time have really helped yourselves by putting together things that make what you do for us day in and day out that we don't always think about, make it so much clearer. So we thank you for the presentation. We also think you should thank yourself because you're making your own case. Fred, you had questions.
Yes, thank you. Director Simmons, first of all, are any of the positions grant positions that you have right now? I mean, is any of this stuff paid for by grant? I'm looking at the budget book, and the salaries, you have $432,000, give or take. Is that all budget money, or is any of that covered by grants? I think I know the answer, but.
So you kind of faded in and out. I didn't hear your question in its entirety. Can anybody answer that question? I didn't hear it in its entirety.
I think that I'm looking at the budget book, and it indicates salaries and benefits of $432,000 plus or minus. Is any of that covered by grant money, or is that in addition to the grant money?
Jody has.
So in that 467,000 you see, it is the director, it is Deputy Director Mandel, it is Nicole. I don't know what her title is. And I think that might be the 3 that are in there. I'll check my list in just a second. But in addition to this, they have grant funding in the grant fund that is covering 4 individuals. The other 4.
Okay.
But
All right.
Jody, that doesn't show up in the this schedule, right?
Yeah.
In his operating budget, no. But if you go to the grant schedule that's in the budget book and you find the grant that's covering them, and I don't have the name of it in front of me right now, you would find that grant with the funding there.
So this is an accounting problem, and it's similar to the problem we had when we were talking about parks, where it was mentioned in passing that there were a dozen employees that were on contract part-time that weren't showing up in either the staffing or the dollars. It makes it very hard to get a clear sense of the total monies that are being appropriated to and expended by each of these departments. So I think that's something we've got to figure out how we can get the full picture. I think Alderman Payon is.
Well, I will look at the grants listing, and we can pick out the number that represents their grants, and it may even have their department in there. So it is in your budget book. It's just leading you to it.
Right. That you're exactly right. It's helping us get to the right place so that we really know the full amount that is being appropriated and expended by each of the components as we deliberate.
Okay.
Right on.
The Director Simmons, the budget has more than doubled since fiscal year 2019. What are we getting for our money now that we didn't have back then?
From OEM?
Well, I'm looking at the budget summary here in our budget book. It was $195,000 for total expenditures, and for fiscal year 2019, it's now $463,800.
Can I jump in, Kevin? Can I jump in? Kevin, part of that, Fred, is what you just had uncovered and pointed out. Back in those years, we didn't have, we only had 1 or 2 people on civil service salaries, and the rest of it wasn't shown. So everybody else was on grants. So I'll let Jody speak to that, but I think some of this increase is an illusion.
Well, may I ask, isn't that part because we moved Kevin from deputy fire chief into OEM?
Yes, that's exactly it. That is the chief coming from the fire department over into OEM. Thank you, Sheila.
Thank you.
Look, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask questions like that. I just need to make sure. Also, while I'm at it, the performance measures for last year and going through them, it looks like you probably met your goals for most of them, but I do have a couple of questions. One of your goals was to revisit emergency action planning for houses of worship and businesses. I seem to think that you have gotten it together with local churches. I seem to remember you're talking about that previously, but Can you tell us very briefly what you have done in that regard?
Well, it's two things that come to mind right off. One is that the security grant from the state, we reached out to all of the houses of worship in the city of Annapolis, in and around the city of Annapolis, and we've helped them apply for safety features for their facilities based on this grant. And this grant is open until actually June in 2 months. So that was an interaction that we've had with them. The second is that we focused our active assailant on houses of worship. And we got with houses of worship, we invited them to our exercise that we had at Mount Moriah. And a lot of them showed up, witnessed, helped us. A lot of the congregation acted as victims and all. So we've had a robust interaction with the houses of worship. As a matter of fact, Hannah has worked with at least 2 of them recently in getting their grant applications together. So that's a kind of a constant with us.
Okay. Well, you have five here. That was the first one. The second one is establish a program for disaster recovery and disaster cost recovery. Number 3, develop a training and exercise program. Number 4, formalize Office of Emergency Management operating procedures. 5, OEM finalize and revise plans looks like for updating your emergency response plans. Have you done?
Some of them I've been successful with, and some of them are still a work in progress. The plans I feel really good about. In-house procedures, we're still working with that. And mention a couple others, I'll give you a status of them.
That was the one I had questions about. I didn't think maybe you'd done that. The other 4, it seems like,
yeah,
my observation is that you've done.
By us becoming a standalone organization, it's not like fire and police has been in existence for a long time. So we need to do in-house policies on policies that we don't even know that we need yet. So that's going to be an ongoing thing, probably for a couple of years.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Very welcome.
So Fred, you're looking at things that I don't seem to have. I'm wondering if I have the latest.
That was last year.
Last year.
Last year's, I was going to say. I was looking at this year's and not seeing it.
I was just asking him how to review it and how he thought he did. They gave us performance goals and plans, and
we just have a couple of minutes left. Sheila has her hand up, and I think Ellie might also. We got to hurry.
First of all, I think this department gives us the greatest bang for our buck, because most of it cost us absolutely nothing, yet it is crucial to the survival of our city. And I admit I've been a big proponent of OEM from day one, and my support hasn't wavered. But because of our constantly changing times, they have had to adjust what they do to meet whatever the needs are. And they have managed to step up with little or no budget to take care of our city. So I just wanted to say thank you to the department and congratulations on the job that you have done for us over the last 10 years. And, you know, I know that we are a model in the state because of what you are able to do with such a small group of people with almost no money other than monies that you are able to bring into our city from grants. And so we owe you a debt of gratitude for doing what you do every day. So thank you.
And thank you for your support.
Ellie, did you have...
real quick. On page 30, I'm a little confused. On page 30 in the budget book, okay, Office of Emergency Management, it's the grant fund revenue detail. So that total Office of Emergency Management, the revenue from grants is $1,947,290. which is a big increase. So where is the rest of that revenue going? Because that's more than what the budget for OEM is. Do you understand my question?
Is that a question to me?
I think it's to Jody.
No, that is a question either for Director Simmons or Deputy Director Mandel. What are the grant funds being used for besides those 4 employees?
Well, it's just there. It says total Office of Emergency Management. Like, so you assume all of that is going to the Office of Emergency Management, which
They're
is
the ones who are in charge of
Let's
spending.
let Dave answer.
I can answer that question. And
Yeah.
Julian, if you could put up slide number 7 really quick.
I was going to say, I think they went over that with us
Yes,
earlier.
if you could put slide 7 up really quick, that would be helpful.
So the answer is that OEM garnishes a lot of grants that don't
I
go
understand.
to OEM. There we go. There it is.
That's it. So this is a snapshot of where all the grant funding goes to.
Okay. So I don't think you understand my question, Ross. But it's more than the OEM budget. So you allocate this bucket of grants to other departments. That might.
Can I jump in?
Please,
Yes.
Dave.
So if you look at the previous slide, slide 6, 2019 was an outsized year in that we received $1 million for the Comprehensive Flood Management Grant, which pretty much goes right to Public Works for the flood mitigation efforts. So we got about $2 million, in excess of $2 million in 2019. But it's possible it may have been attributed on the revenue side to Public Works. But we were the kind of organization in conjunction with Public Works to get that funds to Annapolis.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, because your budget is $463,800. So you could assume that you're totally grant funded almost. I mean, you should be.
Pretty much.
The grants don't cover the director, the deputy director, and
Grant coordinator.
Special.
it doesn't cover those employees or their operating expenses. It covers other initiatives that they had on that list for page 7.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right. I want to thank Kevin and Dave for the presentation. It was very thorough. I want to add my thanks to Sheila. As you know, I was a late conversion, but I certainly recognize the value of what you're doing and have done for us and will continue to do for us, and we appreciate it. And I do appreciate the quality of your presentation today. I think it's very helpful, and we do make that promise to get back to the item that we put on our parking lot sometime later this week. We're almost on time.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, Dave, good job.
I think we're now ready to turn to transportation and Director Gordon.
Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good to see you all this morning. Shall I jump right in?
Please.
Okay. You do have not a PowerPoint presentation, but some documents that can be displayed as I walk through this narrative. The first being the performance measures. The ADOT budget for fiscal year 21 remains virtually unchanged from the fiscal 20 budget. We will continue to provide safe, reliable public transit services and efficient parking management services. In FY20, we were able to maintain all of our program services within adopted budget. And although we are confident that we can do the same in FY21, we know that the recent COVID-19 pandemic may have an impact on implementation of any new initiatives that were included in our recently adopted transit development plan. With regard to the performance measures in FY 2020, we were able to achieve several of our performance goals, including those reported to the state and federal government. With regard to transit, and if you, Julian, if you'll go down, we have a couple of documents in there that show ridership. With regard to transit, we saw improvements in our on-time performance evidenced by a reduction in complaints and missed trips. Average on-time performance for ADA and fixed route service is 100% and 89% respectively. Transit ridership through 9 months of FY 2020 is at 318,508 compared to 307,831 in FY 2019, an increase of about 3.4%. However, we expect total ridership for FY 2020 to decrease. For instance, there was significant reduction in ridership in March 2020. Can we go to the transit slide? There's a rainbow route slide we can move to. Keep going.
Director Gordon, while Julian's doing that, those numbers that you just ticked off, am I on mute? Director Gordon, those numbers you just ticked off, can we get those
Absolutely.
in hard copy? That's exactly what we were looking for, and I think is the purpose of having this performance measurement system. So that would be very helpful.
Absolutely. Go get it to you.
Thank you.
Sure. Additionally, in March 2020, fare revenue dropped by about 25% compared to March 2019. The reduction in overall ridership and fare revenue is due primarily to COVID-19 and associated business closings and cancellations of several special events. You can move on to the next one. There's a parking, keep going. There's one for parking coming up. Stop right, you can stop it, there you go, okay. With regard to parking, through 3/4 of FY 2020, the department issued 11,916 citations. Revenue from on-street parking operations, that's citations and parking meters, during the same period was about $1.87 million. Compared to February 2020, both citations and total on-street parking revenue in March 2020 were significantly lower. Citations were down by about 26%, and total on-street parking revenue dropped by about 35.5%.
Director Gerald, we're not seeing citations. We're seeing vehicle parking by garage and lot. Is there another slide we should be looking at?
There should be another slide in there. There you go. There's citations. Okay. As with transit, these declines were primarily related to COVID-19 that resulted in the closing of businesses, the shortening of the General Assembly session, and the cancellation of major city events. There were a number of changes made in FY 2020, and they include the acquisition of 2 heavy-duty buses, development and implementation of a new FTA mandated safety management system plan.
Director, can we stay on citations for 1 second? It's kind of interesting that even in December with free parking, we were generating citations, and it's also interesting that even with COVID-19, we're not as low in March as we were in December, but I guess I'd like to know what your speculation is about what April and May would look like.
April and May will probably be a further decrease. We've relaxed citations in, as you know, in most of the commercial areas. So really the only place that we're doing it is in residential communities, and there isn't much going on right now. Everybody's at home, so there isn't a lot of transient parking in those communities.
Thank you.
Back to the free fare program. Since its implementation in 2018, there have been 9,900 students that have benefited from the program.
Is there a slide for this? I mean, we're having.
No, there is not.
Oh, okay.
We are also working with the Circulator to provide student access to school meals during the pandemic. Changes and improvements planned for 2021 include continuing updates to our Google Maps to include all ADOT bus stops and develop a program to replace existing bus stop signs with a more uniform sign. We will also be installing bus route maps in all of our bus shelters. As part of our vehicle replacement program, we are pursuing capital grants for the purchase of 2 new heavy-duty buses to replace aging buses in our fleet. That'll help reduce maintenance costs. We're developing mobile phone access to bus routes and schedules throughout the transit system. We will continue to work closely with the parking contractor to improve parking services and rebrand the circulator to attract more riders as we prepare for major downtown construction projects. We're going to continue implementation of our parking mobile app. We have proposed 2 capital projects, one to replace garage access equipment at Gotts Court, Knighton Garage, and the Lock and Lot. And the other project is the installation of multi-space parking meter kiosks. And these are going to replace the older single space meters that are beginning to fail. We will also continue to review our programs with the goal of identifying and eliminating inefficiencies while improving the experience of both parkers and transit passengers. With regard to enhancements, we did submit 1 enhancement request this year, and that was the creation of 1 additional transit supervisor position to provide full coverage during 7-day-a-week operations. We've since pulled that one back. So with that, that's a quick overview of where we are. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I also have Deputy Director Kwaku here with me. Thank you.
Well, let me just start by commenting that you gave us some very good information, but it was frankly hard to follow. I'm hoping that you can convert all of the information that you gave us into some sort of a hard copy. I mean, my preference would be PowerPoint, but hard copy presentation, not just for us on the committee, but we're thinking that this procedure is also going to be extremely beneficial going directly to the budget binders for our colleagues on the council, so that when we do the council-wide deliberations, they won't have to be brought back up to speed like we're being brought up to speed. So I think maybe Director Gerald, I would suggest maybe this is something that maybe Lynn Farrow could help with, but I was scrambling very quickly trying to write down what you were saying, and I'd much rather see it and be able to evaluate it. So that would be a request that I would ask of you, both for the committee, but also I think for our colleagues.
We'll get you hard copies.
Thank you. Alderwoman Finlayson, I believe you had a question?
Yes, I too was trying to follow along and take notes. Director Gordon, I'm looking at the document that Jody gave us with all of the it's called, it's the line item, like page 17. And I'm looking at the bottom line, which I think is the cost for transit. So if I'm reading this correctly, the proposed for 2021 is 3.9 million. Am I reading this correctly?
I don't have that in front of me, but go ahead.
Okay, well, what I want to see is the cost for transit. And parallel that with the revenue that's generated by transit.
Okay.
And Sheila, also the transfer, this doesn't seem like it shows the transfer from the parking fund. I mean, my recollection is that the transportation budget is much larger than this, but I think you're really onto something with this question.
Well, that was the next part of my question. Where is the crossover from parking to transit?
The transfer coming from the parking fund is a revenue. in the transit fund, not an expense. So you won't see it in the line item detail expenses that you see coming across. It is a revenue item. And if we look, I'm trying to find the revenue table in the budget book that will show you where that is.
I think it would be very helpful if we had on one page what the expenditures, the cost of operating transit, the revenue that's generated from parking and transit, because we do generate some revenue from transit. I don't think it's 5%, or whatever is the industry standard, but we do generate some revenue, do we not?
It's on page 20, page 24 of the budget is very helpful in that. I think that answers your question, Sheila.
I am looking for a document that has all of transit's costs. I think that's going to be helpful to us, not only in this process, but when we're talking about City Dock, the cost for transit has to be part of that discussion. And so we need to see the numbers, past and present and future, so we know what the expectation is. So Jody, could you provide you and Director Gordon?
You want a one-page presentation that has both transportation and parking revenues and expenses on the same page?
Yes.
Actually, probably more than one page. This is, Sheila, I totally concur with you. It's impossible, particularly when we're trying to flip from different pages in the whole budget binder.
They're different.
That's what a line item budget gives us. It shows us revenues and expenditures with some line item detail, with including transfers, that allows us to understand what is going on as we evaluate department by department. And so I strongly concur with that request. I don't care how many pages it is, whatever number of pages it needs, but we clearly don't have enough. Yes.
Alderman Arnett, you do have the detail of the revenue. You have the detail of the expenditures, but they're not all on the same page, and that we can pull together for you.
That would be very appreciated. That would be extremely helpful. And I understand that that's a level of work, and I don't mean to minimize in any way how much work you and the staff, Katie and others, have been doing, but it really is essential for us to be able to do our work. And it is very hard, particularly since we don't have the facility with the binder you do, to know to go to page 24 or page 68 and other pages, hold our finger in it. It'd really be nice if we could have it organized by departments with revenues, expenditures, transfers, any of the other items that we would need to know as we go through. We're doing this department by department. We need to see the financial data department by department on both sides of the ledgers, revenue, expenditures, including the part of revenue that is transferred. So we thank you for that.
Ross, one more question. For Director Gordon, under enhancements, you mentioned one position, which is a garage equipment operator.
No, it was a transit supervisor.
Transit supervisor. Do you,
Where are you seeing that, Sheila? I don't see enhancements.
He mentioned it in his presentation. It's not.
It wasn't included.
Okay.
Right.
I wanted to know what the cost was, that's all. Total cost for that.
I want to say about $60,000. Yeah, it's about $60,000.
Is that inclusive of benefits?
Yes.
So again, reminder, we did ask to hear enhancements, mainly to get an idea of what it is that we're foregoing because of the circumstances. And in fact, we're going in the opposite direction of enhancements. We're doing reductions here and there in the appropriations level for the 2000 budget in order to make it balance. But again, that would be something. I think the real model to follow is the one that Public Works put forth, because they managed that quite nicely in their PowerPoint presentation, where they went through by the performance measures, how they were meeting their measures, then they related that to the budget, then they talked about enhancements, and also, and we want to give you an opportunity, Director Gordon, to do this, the hardships that you're facing. And in fact, we really need to talk about how we're running a transit system in a virus environment where I don't know, it looks to me like ridership is down even more than ever. And when do we get to a point where we discuss whether we continue to run as many buses? I know that doesn't cut costs, and I'll anticipate Sheila a little bit here. We still have the drivers, whether they're out driving or just at the bus barn waiting for whenever the next bus goes out. But still, and in fact, I think over and above the question I asked, are we putting people onto buses with masks, not masks? I mean, are we creating occasions where people have an opportunity to transmit the virus? So I think there's a general conversation I'd like us to get to at some point in this dialogue about what does transit mean in the COVID-19 environment.
We are, Alderman, we are continuing to operate our transit system. We are operating on a Saturday schedule with enhancements, which means we have less vehicles on the road at this time. Because of that, we have a couple extra drivers in the shop most days. Sometimes you get an occasional employee that calls out. So by having a couple extra drivers, we have someone to fill in that route. We also use any excess drivers to clean and sanitize the buses. Our buses are washed almost daily, right? Which is good for us. When it comes to PPEs, all of our operators wear face coverings. They wear gloves, and right now we're working on a shield that separates the driver from the passenger. Something that we've come up with internally for relatively much cost. So we're doing that. Since the governor's executive order last week, all passengers now are required to wear face coverings. And as of Saturday, we had 100% compliance from the passengers.
Director, are they disallowed on the buses if they don't have a face covering?
Yes, they would be.
So I think that's something we need to think about. I wish OEM, but maybe Director Gerald, you know, we are still on the upward slope on new cases, are we not? Aren't we anticipating that towards the end of this month, in the middle of May, we're going to be at peak new cases, in which case I think it's time to be even more cautious than ever. And as I said in a recent email, it's not just for ourselves, it's for all of the public safety people, the healthcare providers, all of the people that are providing us services in the grocery stores and drugstores and so forth. It's not just protection of ourselves, it's protection for everybody. So I think it would be worth discussing, and I'm glad to see you're here, Kevin. Really, are there more steps we need to take to protect this against the spread of the virus? I'm not sure we can do it on our own, but does seem like there seems to be guidance from the Surgeon General and from the governor that having a mask on is something that mitigates transmission. I'm not a clinician, but it does seem like we need to be talking about that.
We that's certainly one of the parts of it to kind of prevent the spread and flatten the curve as well. Again, as I talked about in my presentation, our goal is to make sure that every employee has at least 2 face coverings. We're reserving the medical grade type mask for the first responders. Today, we're doing walk-up testing and parole. And my initial reports are that the they've given us 40 test kits. We're going to surpass, we think we're going to surpass the 40 test kits. My initial reporting is that they're getting more test kits because this is pretty successful. And also the big thing right now is the testing.
Is that testing for antibodies or testing for presence of the virus?
Presence of the virus.
Yeah. See, it's the antibody testing, I think, is what's going to get us all back to work. But 40 out of 40,000, I mean, I know that there's a national supply chain issue, but boy, it just feels like we need to get on getting more tests, kits available. Not you. I'm not directing that at you. I'm not calling you. I think you're hamstrung by a national availability problem.
I am concerned because the Pasadena, Glen Burnie, and the city of Annapolis has the highest numbers, and
yeah,
we need to increase testing, and that's what we're working on. So stand by.
But I also think we need to appreciate. I'll get you in a second, Sheila. This is really the big peak. I mean, we may get another one, unfortunately, down the road, but I feel like people are suffering from cabin fever and they're really letting down their guard. I was struck watching national television and seeing all of the people streaming down Main Street with no masks. One of the newscasters was actually warned, watch out, there's unprotected people walking by you, kind of thing. This is the time to redouble our guard, it seems to me, but we don't need to drag Director Gordon into this other than if it is a concern on buses as well.
Yes, and he's Director Gordon's doing a great job. He and I talk about this. He's initiating all the precautions. We had a good conversation about this last week, so I'm pretty happy and satisfied where he's taken his level of preparedness and protection of both his ridership and his employees.
May I ask the question, Director Simmons, about today's testing? And I apologize to Director Gordon because I'm taking this in a different direction briefly. Can anyone just show up for a test today, or do they have to have a doctor's permission or referral to do that?
Well,
I thought I read somewhere that they didn't need a doctor's referral.
What we advertise is that they call and they make an appointment. So what is happening is that some people are showing up and they're getting tested. We're not turning anybody away at this point. If we have the test kits, we're going to accommodate them. So if you have your doctor's order, that's fine. If you don't have a doctor and you're symptomatic, we'll make sure that you get tested.
Okay, thank you.
Director Gordon, I'm looking at the sheet that we received from the city manager and then bolstered by the finance director for reductions in the expenditure or appropriations levels for 2021. I don't see any in here for transportation. Did you dodge a bullet?
I did not. I did provide some information to the finance director and the city manager, but it was primarily vacant positions that we had to put forth. Those vacancies, we currently use those funds for overtime to fulfill that transit supervisor hole that we have. The idea of getting that position was going to eliminate that need for overtime. We also use it for our drivers' meetings. We are required to have monthly drivers' meetings. So that was essentially where it came from.
Also, the page of reductions that I provided to you relate only to the general fund, and all of Director Gordon's activities are outside of the general fund. So that's why you're not seeing that on that listing.
Well, how do we get a listing of reductions that are happening outside of the general fund?
So except for keeping vacancies open, there were none in his budget. And in other funds, the water and sewer, they would, as far as actions taken on their budget for next year, they would have the same COLA changes, et cetera, that the rest of the workforce would. but we did not ask them to take operating reductions such as supplies, contract services, that thing, because the enterprise funds are self-supporting.
Finance committee members, did you understand that? That went right. I mean, I understand what Jody just said, but I didn't understand that we weren't seeing all of the proposed reductions across the appropriation budget for all funds.
Okay, so the list of reductions we gave was the reductions that we took to balance the general funds budget. And you may have understood this, that if we took some of those personnel actions, they would also apply to all city employees. However, we did not ask the enterprise funds to reduce their operating budgets for non-personal services.
Okay. How do we memorialize that? Yes, Sheila.
Where is that document? The document is that what you're saying? We don't have that document?
I was not aware that this is what we were doing, and if I have the document, and I'll never deny that I don't have documents in this welter of pages that we have, but I did not have that understanding.
You do not have any documents that would outline the reductions that would take place in the enterprise fund budgets if we had COLA delays, etc. You don't have any pages with those in it. I only provided what we had done to the general fund.
Is that the document that David gave us a couple of weeks ago?
Yes.
So the document that I provided was the general fund. It addressed the general funds. That would have really been apples and oranges to mix them all up. But for instance, the COLAs, as Jody mentioned, the COLA delay affects the enterprise funds as well. The no enhancements affects the enterprise funds as well. But we didn't reach out for 10% budget cuts for the enterprise funds because they're supported by fees.
So I appreciate this new piece of information, and I think I agree with Alderwoman Finlayson. We probably need to get that in some form of writing. We can put it in our Finance Committee report to the council, so we're sure they're all aware of it. But we're eating into Director Gordon's time on more general things, so I would like to give him and you committee, or I don't see any other alderperson on, but more time to talk about transportation specifically. If nobody has an immediate question, I do, which is where we have, this has got to be having an impact on the use of garages, maybe not, that's my presumption. And it could be that the COVID virus was giving us an opportunity to very quickly take the Hillman garage out of service, rebuild it and put it back in, and hopefully we'll be over the virus by then. But if not, those parking revenues help take care of the maintenance of those garages. And of course, Hillman throws off a lot of money that goes to transfers elsewhere. And so I guess I'm wondering what the long-term thinking is about not only keeping buses running, but also garages open. I'm wondering about our parking meter management. Are our people who are reading and taking care of the meters, are they also going to be safe in this environment? And again, there's maintenance costs for meters. So there's a whole cloud out there that's looming. And I'm wondering if transportation isn't really going to be one of the groups most directly affected on the front line as we react to this pandemic.
Well, we are continuing to work, Alderman. We do have our staff as well as the contractor staff still collecting meter revenue, making repairs as necessary. I agree the garages are fairly empty, but we continue to have them staffed just to address any issues that anybody that uses a garage may have. But you're right, we're out there, we're on the front lines, and we're taking all of the necessary precautions to keep our people as well as the contractors' people safe.
So we're making a budget for the coming year, starting 1st of July. And it feels to me like we're going into that budget knowing that the use and therefore revenue from these different sources is potentially going to be way down. And I'm wondering, and in fact, I'll ask that this go on our parking lot for our deliberations. It seems to me like we need to be looking ahead. We need help from you, City Manager Gerald, and the administration thinking about how we're going to deal with budgets that are going to be very largely impacted by this downturn because of the virus, but also downturn in the economy because people in the service industries in particular are no longer going to work. We're hoping that the grants and the federal actions will take care of them, but they're not going to be needing this. And I know for a fact on Main Street, a lot of the people using parking meters are the people that work in the restaurants and bars on Main Street, and they're closed.
Is that a question for me?
Well, the question is, how do we look forward to an appropriations budget for the coming year that is appropriating staff and dollars for services that A, aren't going to be generating revenue, and B, may not be needing services?
So the assumptions that we made as we put together the budget on the revenue side is that that revenues would be down across the board through the summer. And then in the fall, things would start to return to normal. So that gives us, another, until September. So another 4 or 5 months for the economy to start turning and things to start returning to normal. That was not an extremely bad prognosis on things. Maybe it was a relatively conservative one. If things turn much worse than that, then we're going to have to reconsider what those assumptions were. But the assumptions that we made when we were putting this together, mostly in March, is that things would start to turn and return pretty much to normal by the fall. But that we would have 2 bad summer months, which are important months for us here in Annapolis, as you all well know. We would have 2 bad months of this fiscal year, and then things would start to return. So all of the budget, including the enterprise funds and the general fund, were all based on those assumptions. Again, as we move into that time and as we continue to look at the projections and see how realistic they were, we'll need to adjust. And we understand that there's so much that's unknown right now that we made the best estimates that we could. We made those assumptions accordingly, and then we'll just have to be nimble enough to adjust as we go forward.
May I ask, David, then it sounds like the budget has been proposed based upon a 25% reduction in cost and services. Am I extreme? I mean, if we're at things getting to normal, not until September, which is 3 months into our budget year, then
so I'm not sure what the percentage was. Jody may know the percentage, but
Well, just as you were asking that question, Alderwoman Finlayson, I was looking at the parking fund revenue, and in 20, we had a budget of revenue coming in of $9.1 million. And if you see 20,
what page are you on, Jody, please?
I'm on page 65, where I have the revenue table.
Thank you.
And just, I hadn't gone through and like calculated this as a percentage, but if you see the original 2020 budget of 9.1 million for the parking fund, which is where we thought we were headed in 20, you'll see that 20 projected is down to 6.6. And for 21, we're projecting 7,178,000. So, I don't know what that is percentage wise, but that's what you're seeing there is that we think we're going to have reduced revenues. And we're also projecting that we will in FY21 send some of those over to transportation, and we're hoping the transportation fund will be equal balanced revenue to expenditures, but that we'll have to see. Like we said, if things are slower to pick up and it looks like that we won't be recovering in the fall, we're going to have to revisit the budgets and see if we need to take further action. But as of right now, we don't have enough information to know what those numbers should be.
And I totally appreciate that. And I see what you're pointing to on page 65, but when you go to page 127 for the transportation budget, those are modest. I mean, if you go off of projected 2020, there are increases. If you go off of the budgeted 2020, there are modest declines for administration. For operations, there are actually increases. And I guess I question whether, I understand this all was being made when all of this was roiling up, but I'm wondering if we can still stand by these kinds of expenditure assumptions and revenue assumptions for the transportation fund.
Okay, the transportation fund is assumed to move forward with the same level of personnel and routes that we currently have. Remember, all employees were going to get a COLA on July 1. We have proposed pushing that back to January, but there still would be personal services increases. In the transportation budget, we assume that parking fund will raise enough revenues to send a good sized transfer over so that they can balance in 21. And that's assuming that ridership begins to pick up slowly in the summer and into the fall, and we get back to normal. If that doesn't pan out, we will have to revisit our assumptions.
So I think this is actually a healthy discussion to have, at least in front of Director Gordon, if not with him, because I think that when we do finally get to the replacement of Hillman Garage, hopefully the virus will be long behind us. We're going to be facing exactly these same kinds of questions once again, because that's a major hit to a source of revenue for revenue transfer to the transportation fund. And my question is, can we afford to continue to run the transit system the way we are running it when we know we're not going to have, when Hillman is down, and right now with the virus in vogue, we're not going to get those revenues. And so ought we not right now to be thinking about what kinds of adjustments we need to be making? And perhaps this is something that we'll do when the Finance Committee does its deliberation. But frankly, I would like to at least do a little bit of this with Director Gordon. It's his shop. And I think he ought at least to hear the kinds of musings that are going on in my mind. He might not like the sound of it, but I think these are things that we really need to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I really do think that these are policy deliberations. We put together the budget assuming that there would be no service cuts in the transportation side. And that's what Rick should be building his budget to, quite frankly. So
yeah,
I think as we have those deliberations, we can certainly bring Rick back so he can participate in those discussions of what service changes might mean and how much money could be saved. But just as far as putting together the budget, we assume that there were no service cuts, and the budget reflects that.
I understand that, and I agree. And I do agree also it's a policy thing that first the Finance Committee and then the Council will have to take up. Not a pleasant task, I think, for any of us, but I don't think we can just pretend like it's not coming our way. Sheila, did you have your hand up?
Yes and no, but yes. taking it a step further, and this takes us into the definite future, but I think it would behoove us to keep in mind the public-private partnership that is being sought to do the garage and how that's going to impact transit. So I know that's not part of this budget process, but if we're talking about Hillman being taken offline, at least during the reconstruction, but then if it's taken offline for, as far as revenues are concerned, to impact transit, then that's a bigger discussion that we're going to have.
Yeah, and that certainly is a very important discussion, clearly. But at that time that we have the discussion, we'll much better know the numbers that are involved with that, how much the city will be getting out of that whole deal, and whether that's going to be sufficient to allow us to move forward with that deal and still support parking and transportation.
I'm glad you said that, the latter, David, that it's going to impact whether we go forward with the deal. Because I think that's an important component that we can't leave to chance.
I just heard the mayor's heart palpitate. Fred, were you going to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. You looked like you were waiting for time in. Yes, I think you're right, Director Gerald. We will, when we get back, assumably in a month or so, to hearing about the RFP. I was just looking at the request for proposal last night. I ran across it in one of my stacks and was musing about when we'll hear about that. But you are right. I believe that not only will we see what they're proposing, but we're going to have a better sense of what the virus is doing to us, hopefully in the short term. But I do think that the impacts the virus are having on us are a lot like the impacts that Hillman being down in a healthier environment, we hope, will be bringing to transportation, parking, that whole bolus of things that we need to consider. Did that just kill the conversation?
Is Director Gordon finished?
Yeah, I am. And I just want to thank you all for your time. I will see that you get a hard copy of all the information that I provide.
Yeah, that would be extremely helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if I could just say that, the transportation guys, all of our bus drivers are the forgotten people on the front lines of all of this right now. They're out there driving the buses, putting themselves at risk as people come onto the buses. So we want to thank them for all they do every day.
Thanks, David.
I agree, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gordon. And we do look forward to that hard copy so we can, it probably, I warn you, probably will generate more questions, but I think that's what we're supposed to do.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. Well, committee, I think we did a much better job today. Thank you for keeping me on track. We're actually have a second to talk about the kinds of things that we were talking about in the beginning of our meetings before, instead of letting the director speak. Are there any observations about either OEM or transportation at this point before we talk about other housekeeping matters?
Well, I, for one, had a really hard time following the numbers and the different pages here and there on the last presentation. That's why I might have had the quizzical look on my face, because I was trying to listen very carefully, intently. I try to learn things, and I don't usually learn much when I'm doing the talking. I really am anxiously looking forward to the hard copies of what the director is going to send us, because it doesn't make much sense to me. The number I came up with was a deficit of $2,666,484. But that might be subject. I think that's going to be increased when I see the other paperwork involved with this. But it is what it is.
So I share your observation, Alderman Payon. I thought your questions were good. I had the same level of confusion, and I'm hoping that we can get a redo of that. It was the same place I found myself when we started to get the presentation from police. And I guess my plea would be to Director Gerald to let the departments know what a good process looks like, and what a process is that is harder for us to follow. I think it does everybody good to get us all on the same page. And as I've said many times, I think it does the departments good to the extent that these presentations go out into the public to get the entire constituency online. We mention not often enough how much these staff day in, day out carry on the business of the city. And I think it's very easy, some would even accuse me of this, of not remembering all the things they're doing. And these PowerPoint presentations and performance measures, I think, are a very rigorous way to set that out and to remind us and let us remind our constituents what they're getting for their tax dollars, and help them be more appreciative with that kind of a reminder. But it is also an important part of our deliberations. We need to make a report to the council, and I'd like it to be a better than ever report. Fred?
Yeah, we're going to get a copy of the PowerPoint, such as it was, presentation. A couple of those slides I thought were pretty informative. You didn't have very many, but that's okay. I'd like to get a copy of those if I could.
Well, I think that's what we're asking from all the departments. We'd asked everyone to give it to us in advance through Takia, and Takia has her hand up.
Good morning. The presentation came this morning, right, I think prior to the meeting starting, but I did attach it to the ID for transportation, and also fires is attached.
Yeah, and I would caution us to remember that this is a brand new well, it's not brand new, actually. Ellen had this, and Panelides had a version of this, but this is a new thing that was introduced last year by then City Manager Sutherland, and I think it's a good thing. But our departments are all, they get these new directives every year or so, and they're also scrambling to come up to speed on it. I think we need to be indulgent to some extent, but I've gotten a taste of how good it can be, and I'd really like to continue getting that kind of information in an organized way. Sheila.
Tomorrow we have scheduled planning and zoning and police. Could we have Takia reach out to police to make sure they're aware that, one, they're on the schedule for tomorrow, and two, that they can send us their presentation in advance? Well, to everybody. I think you just asked David to do that. And are we having the mayor's office come back? And we have not heard from the Office of Environmental Policy. Or we're not going to hear from that office?
So several questions there. One, yeah, I think, I don't know, Director Gerald, whether you spoke to Deputy Chief Herman or not about his presentation. I hope you did, and I hope we see a presentation crafted somewhat differently than it started out.
I did speak to him.
All right.
Thank you.
And
I also request that everybody that's remaining provide their presentations as soon as possible, so you can look at them before they actually come before you to make the presentation.
Thank you. That's very helpful. As far as the mayor's office, I have been having a running dialogue with Chief of Staff Smith. She has, in the last version of that, indicated a willingness to come back and answer our questions, but she doesn't seem to feel that the mayor's office needs to have performance measures. I've spoken with a couple of council members, Fred and Savage, over the weekend, because I realized the city council also gets an appropriation, and the city council probably also could do with having some goals, objectives, benchmarks, and performance measures. I think that's something that we might want to think about working on. If we're asking it of the mayor's staff, perhaps we need to ask it of ourselves. I am becoming a very firm believer in this process. I see it doing a lot of beneficial things for all of us. So I will continue a dialogue with Susie Smith and see what is in the offing there. I would like to have her come back and talk to us, but I don't know that I have the authority to. I can request it.
Mr. Chair, may I remind us that our costs are fixed. There is no discussion about whether we need performance standards. That is done at election time. However, the mayor's office does have an opportunity, and their budget is not fixed. So, you know, I would think that, and we said this previously, that this is an opportunity to share the mayor's vision for moving the city forward, this One Annapolis movement, and to think that they don't have to share with us any of the details is it's a quandary, I guess I should say. Anyway, the other department, as I mentioned, is the Office of Environmental Policy. When will we hear? Because I'm just trying to get our schedule fine-tuned. If we want to put them in on Wednesday.
Well, Office of Environmental Policy certainly has a robust set of goals, objectives, benchmarks, and performance measures, maybe the most detailed of any department or organization. And I do think we need to hear with them. We're kind of in a cusp. I'd look to City Manager Gerald for a little guidance. We're sort of midstream in terms of rethinking that whole operation, but the committee did agree that we're treating the budget with the organization that is in place now in terms of the reporting organizations. And Takia's going to help me out of this fumbling.
No, you can continue. I'm actually replying to Alderwoman Finlayson.
I'm sorry, you were bringing up Takia, so I didn't understand what you were saying.
I'm sorry. I was actually replying to you about Wednesday. I don't think that would be a good idea. You have 2 meetings set for Wednesday, and both of them I don't think would be able to have an addition to it. The first one.
And we don't have anything scheduled for Friday. Not that I'm encouraging that, but I just want us to schedule it and give give them adequate notice. So that's why I'm raising it.
Thursday, you rescheduled Office of Law, and then after that, you just have committee deliberations. You can add them to the agenda for Thursday. Or like you said, we don't have a meeting on Friday set. So.
Takia, can you send us out a revised schedule? Fred and I were looking at that over the weekend, like the one that we had originally, but with everybody rescheduled,
Sure.
You know, a one-pager. That would be very helpful. We're about out of time. Takia, I would like to coordinate with you about the things that we put on the parking lot for today's meeting, but we can do that in the afternoon sometime. City Manager Gerald,
Yeah, so on the Office of Environmental Programs, maybe we can talk about that more. That's a quandary for us because clearly the mayor's budget does not have an Office of Environmental Programs. But I'm not sure what we would present. It sounds like as you all transition and have your budget that's going to go up for approval, you're going to break that back apart and have an Office of Environmental Programs. So we need to figure out how we want to deal with that.
And as you and I spoke, it's not a lot of moving parts, nor do the dollars change, but it is more burden on the finance staff. So maybe that's yet another item we can put on the parking lot. I agree with the sense of the finance committee that we really should budget for the organization we have. Some things that might temporize that in my mind are, where are we on legislation to change it? What is the sense of the mood of the council to support that legislation?
Just about done, Bubs. Give me like 5 minutes.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, I was speaking to my son.
Oh, all right.
I move that we adjourn.
Yes, I think we can adjourn, but yeah, we do need to talk. I think that's another thing on the parking lot. Is there a second?
Second.
Very good job today, committee, for meeting our timeline. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
And goodbye.
We're adjourned.
All right. Take care. See you guys tomorrow.